Good evening and welcome to Northshire Bookstore. My name is David Wood. I'm the events manager at Northshire's Manchester location. I welcome you tonight for tonight's virtual event with Bill McKibben's first children's book, We Are Better Together, in conversation with Carole Lindstrom. Throughout this evening, at any point, please type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I'll be sure to save those and ask them for you when we get to the Q&A at the end of tonight's evening. Bill McKibben is an environmentalist, an author of over 20 books, an educator, and the founder of both 350.org and Third Act. Northshire has the great pleasure in person for the publication of his new memoir, The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. The graying American looks back at his suburban boyhood and wonders what the hell happened. We Are Better Together is a hopeful, inspiring book celebrating the power of human cooperation and the beauty of life on Earth. The School Library Review said of it, optimistic and powerful through its simplicity, We Are Better Together highlights communication and shared hopes for the future of the Earth. He is joined today by Carole Lindstrom, the author of the New York Caldecott award-winning title, We Are Water Protectors. She is an Anishinaabe Métis and is a proud member of the Turtle Mountain Band. Please join me in welcoming to Northshire Bookstore, Carole Lindstrom and Bill McKibben. Bill will start out by positioning the book for us and doing a short reading of it.
Well, David, thank you very much. What a pleasure to be here. A special thanks to Carole for being willing to join in. It makes me very happy because I am a big fan of hers. And many, many thanks to the good folks at the publisher. Chantal Gersh is with us today helping out. And, you know, they've really done a remarkable job at Holt with this, and I'm super grateful for it. As David said, I've never written a children's book before. And so I'll confess, I don't really know how to do it. But I spent an awful lot of time reading books to my daughter when she was young. And so I think that's what was in my mind's eye as I was doing this. And as I read it today, I think I'm going to imagine that I've got in my lap the young woman to whom it's dedicated, Dorsey Blue of the Granite State of New Hampshire. I will say that it's designed to be read and interpolated by parents or others as they read it, to be commented on, thought about. It's less a story almost than a series of cues and prompts for thinking about the world and our place in it. And as you will see, it's driven very strongly by a theme that's run through all my work, both my writing and my organizing work for many, many years, which is that the kind of hyper-individualism that overtook America at a certain point was a bad idea, and that we're much better when we're in relationship to each other. So if Chantal wants to load up the PowerPoint there, I'm going to try and start and just read right through. And you can go forward a page or two there, even one more. And let me say that most of the credit here goes to the wonderful illustrator, Stevie Lewis, who just did the most magnificent job with these words, and who chose imagery and also a color palette that got across completely what I wanted. So, Dorsey, here we go. The human game is a team sport. It took a band, a clan, a community to raise humans to adulthood. We hunted together in groups. With our complex language, we're able to keep track of one another. And when we work together, we can do incredible things. We can harness the power of the sun. We can reforest the land. We can help lost sea turtles find their way to the ocean. We can explore the farthest reaches of space. And looking back, we can see how we are changing our planet. It's a beautiful, fragile place, and it's worthy of protection. We can accept with grace that each of us has a moment and a place, that our humanness is important. We have the tools to allow us to stand up to the powerful and the reckless. We know the value of love. It's love that works to feed the hungry. It's love that comes together in defense of those sea turtles and sea ice and all else around us that is good. It's love that lets each of us see we're not the most important thing on earth and makes us okay with that. It's love that welcomes us imperfect into the world. We live on an unbearably beautiful planet, a planet that needs us humans to play together, to cooperate. We're capable of acting together to do remarkable things. So we'd best get started soon. So I must say, it is great fun to get to read it aloud, though not quite as much fun as getting to point at each of the pictures with a kid and figure out where the moose is and what happened to the rocket ship and so on and so forth. But I'm struck as I read it, as I usually am when I look at it, that in some ways it's a very adult book. The concepts in it are deep and rich, perhaps deep and rich enough that at this point only kids can understand them well. and I think that's one of the paradoxes of trying to write for younger people, is you can actually write about, in certain ways, deeper things than you can get away with writing about for adults. To just straightforwardly write about love and connection and hope are things that in a ironic and cynical age become more difficult as people get older. And so what a pleasure it was to get to do this and to think about it. And there I will stop because I want to hear from Carole, who actually knows how to do this and has great experience doing it, and whose books have meant a great deal to me and connect very strongly here. I'm reminded that we share the beginning of a title, "We Are," and those are powerful words because we is, I mean, the question of whether we're an I or a we may be the single deepest question that our culture has to face at this point in time. And I vote for we.
I agree. I agree with we. I agree with we. That should be our slogan. I agree with we.
I like that.
I agree. I agree with everything you said. So many things, but when you said we're better in relationship together, I mean that of course I don't understand why it seems so easy. It's I mean, it's obvious what I think, like you were saying before, with the individual that has done to this planet, and how when we work together, we, when we think of each other, and when we think about our goals and our, our like our purpose and what we're here for, like we're all here, like the same, breathing the same air, drinking the same water, living on the same planet. We really have all the same goals. in the end, it's really to keep this planet going. So our children's children, the next 7 generations, as we look at it, can have a planet to live on. So I'm so grateful for your book. And I want to say something you said too. We were talking before, which I think is the brilliance of picture books and books for children in general, but I think picture books specifically, because I think there's so much more than I think people realize. I know in my experience, and I'm sure you'll find too, with We Are Better Together, that it's used from what, middle grade, high school. I've even been told colleges use the We Are Water Protectors for curriculum writing. And I just think it just has a way of these type of stories, just like bringing things down to just the simple act, the simpleness of everything. We really need each other. We need water to live. Our plants need water, the trees are the animals. And if you just look at it that simply, I mean, that's why kids get it. That's why it's so easy to write for them. I'm sure you find that too, Bill, right? I mean, they get it. Whereas you get grown-ups where they tend to muddy things up with all their whatever, or start adding money into it, and then blah blah blah. Well, we can't do that. No, yes, we can do that. So anyway, I could babble all day with you about this stuff.
Well,
So,
it's so interesting that you say that, because Carole, what I'm doing now is most of my organizing work is we're pulling together a now that I'm in my 60s, we're pulling together a organizing among people over the age of 60. We're calling it the Third Act. And we have people in their 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and a few centenarians all around the country working on climate change and democracy. And one of the things that we're finding is that it's actually somewhat easier to recapture some of that simplicity as one becomes that one had as a child, as one becomes an elder, that the world begins to look a little less complicated again. And I think that that's I mean, it may be because these are the two groups of people who have to worry less about their material needs being met all the time, that someone else may be helping take care of them, or they have Social Security, whatever. But it's also just, there's just something clarifying about having enough time too to sit and think about the world every once in a while. So that's very, very interesting to me. It's possible that kids and grandparents may turn out to be key actors. And of course, I thought a lot when I was reading We Are Water Protectors and thinking about I thought a lot about some of the heroes that have emerged in the last few years, people like Greta Thunberg, or all the other Greta Thunbergs around the world, Vanessa Nakate in Africa, or the remarkable indigenous youth who ran from Standing Rock to Washington, D.C. to publicize the fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline, or just on and on and on. And those were really the inspiration for me writing this, hoping that more and more kids will understand what power and what pleasure there is to be had in. I was in Glasgow for the big climate talks in November, and on the last morning, all the youth were organizing a kind of parade through the city, tens of thousands of them. And it was just so beautiful to be in the park as they were staging it, and people with banners and costumes and musical instruments. And it's like, okay, these guys have figured out a lot of things that all the delegates over at the convention center haven't quite wrapped their heads around yet,
Yeah. That's the thing I feel now with the young people. I just feel hope. But what you said though, I love the third act idea, because I think that is so true. As I also get closer to the third act. I say, you do look at the world. You're you're a different mindset than of the 20s where you're so self-centered and you're just not in the same place, I think, mentally. Like you said, I think I don't know. And I think it's a great chance and opportunity to, like you're saying, perfect opportunity to speak to elders about that. I always think too about in something that I find, and I always equate to me as a child, but about writing for children. And I always talk about it when I talk to schools about water protectors is that one thing that always stuck with me as a child is how I used to nag my parents when I found out something was bad for them, like smoking. I remember being, it beaten our skull when we were in school, smoking cigarettes is terrible, terrible. So I just remember my parents both smoked, but my father was a terrible smoker, So I'm like, Dad, you got to quit smoking, Dad, really, Dad, you shouldn't smoke, Dad. Oh my word, I nagged the pants off of him. One day he just took his pack of cigarettes and put them down next to his chair and said, I'll never smoke again. And he didn't. He quit cold turkey. And I think, I thank myself for that. My father living extra years. But, I think there's something, kids, I don't know. I did it to him about chewing his fingernails. Dad, you probably get a choke. Dad, you get a choke on your fingernail. Then you're going to die. And then where are we going to be? Dad, please, then he's like, he would come up with his fingers and then he would pull it away. And I was, so I just think that's just something simple about this. I don't know, about talking about these simple things that all of us just understand and putting it in a story format where, it's not, being preached at. No one wants to be preached at, and no one wants to hear numbers, and no one wants to hear data. Children, I say, specifically, but even I kind of sometimes don't. I want to know things like, what are your story? And then you get the other stuff later. You can find out the back matter about why is this important, but I got sucked in by a really great story. And that's why I think writing for children. How do you find that it being different from writing for adults? Because you've written for adults for like
Yes.
25 years. So how is that different for you?
Well, oddly, it feels like you can be, in a picture book especially, like you're allowed to be more, a little more elusive. Everything doesn't have to necessarily track to the next thing. I guess I kind of think about reading books before bedtime, when one's in kind of a half liminal space anyway, and kids are sort of and not reading necessarily exactly for always for the story, but for the kind of moments and ideas and things that come along. And I confess some of the things in here I wondered about including. They were messages I thought were really important, but I didn't know. I mean, I'm sort of counting on parents to do some work as they read the book. There's one line in here. It says, "It's love that lets each of us see we're not the most important thing on earth and makes us okay with that." And I know that everybody rightly tells their kid that they're the most special person in the world, and that's how one should feel in one's family and so on. But I also think that most of the messages in our culture are all about how you're the absolute center of everything, and that's caused us some problems. So I hoped that parents would be able to kind of grapple with that as they read it and say, each of us see we're not the most important thing on earth. You're the most important thing in this room, of course, my love, and we take care of you and love you and treasure you. But it's also important to realize that it's a big world with lots of people and lots of creatures and lots of things in it. All of them are important. And so I'm leaving. I guess I'm leaving more work for others to do than I normally do when I'm writing as I normally do.
But I think there's what you're talking about really is empathy in my mind. It's really children being, and I think that what you just say, I think kids can grow, even I think what you're saying is absolutely right. I feel that way about water protectors, about words too. I'm thinking, well, those things in here but I think even if that didn't happen, the way you say it, and then the illustrations together, you know, just like or do everything that I wish that adult books did sometimes,
Yes, yes.
because I really do think, like, I remember vividly my son, who is now, as you saw, my IT guy, but from the time he was born, I was reading him books. And I know sometimes when it was really quiet in the other room, and I'd say, Sam, what are you doing? He'd say Sammy things. But I knew if I looked in the other room, he had the picture books open and he would be flipping pages. And he wasn't old enough to read at a year and a half, but he was telling himself the story because I had read it to him 1,000 times. And so all he had to do was turn the pages and look at the pictures. So together, the pictures, and Stevie did a beautiful job with the illustrations. And I think I think that's one really important uh,
It is.
talent of picture book writing is leaving room for the illustrator.
It's also very interesting to think about writing that is going to be read over and over and over again. Like when you're writing for adults, I mean, maybe if you have a great classic book, maybe you read it 3 times in your life. You go back and read Anna Karenina or something 3 times, maybe in the course of a life, and that's wonderful. But yeah, a well-loved children's book gets read 3 times every afternoon. And so it's a very different, you have to, yeah, it's a
Yep.
very different way of thinking about things. I,
Yep.
it's funny, I'm writing a young adult book at the moment about global warming, a nonfiction account of, they've asked me to do it. And I'm actually finding that extraordinarily fun to do, because I think it turns out actually my natural voice is sort of about junior high school. I mean, there's a sort of you're allowed to kind of there's still a certain amount of earnestness in people of that age, and you're allowed to be just very straightforward and earnest in return, and in certain ways that's easier than the not easier, it's hard, but it's more powerful often than the kind of sophistication that's required in writing, sometimes for adults, and the need to make sure you're being novelty at all times and so on and so forth. I'm very much enjoying it, and it's causing me to think back more on my own childhood and remember the power of all those books in those ages. I can't, if you asked me what I read 2 weeks ago, I would have a hard time telling you what it was. But if you asked me what I read when I was 12, I could talk to you about C.S. Lewis and the Narnia books, till the end of time. And I can probably remember pretty much every plot point and so and it does make it does make you work a little harder. Like you sort of realize each of these pages may actually be read a lot, not just kind of skimmed through.
Exactly. And that's the thing. That's why I like writing for young people too, is what you just said. I think one thing, and reading adult books forever, and then I'm reading young people's books for working mostly, but also for pleasure, I find, because I find I like YA and for myself to read more than I like kind of adult books at times. Sometimes I find the words and just too flowery and just too much description, and in adult books it's like, why are you bogging down the story with all this blah? Just tell us, and young people, they just want to get to the action, and that's why I like to write, I think, for them, because they just want, it's fun to write like that. That's how I think I talk. I think that's how they are. They're very much all over the place. They're very much, excited about this for 1 minute and then not onto this the next. So I don't know. I think it's exciting. I think it's also fun to write for, like you're doing now, with the different age ranges. So picture
Yeah.
book, you have a totally different thing process and different age to think about versus middle grade, and then YA, which you can do kind of more fun, stuff. So
It definitely
yeah,
stretches you as a writer, and because it's easy to fall into any sort of, once you get good at something, to sort of repeat it easily and endlessly. So it's very good practice to, and and but it is that prospect of a real emotional connection with your audience is a wonderful idea on the
yes.
and I actually, I don't know why it's not sort of more common to have people cross back and forth between different age ranges as they write. Um, it, it, I always enjoy it when people do it. So I'm glad that Holt gave me the chance and grateful for it.
Yeah.
What are you
Oh,
working on?
definitely. We're
What
great.
thing
We're
are
great.
you bringing us next, Carole? What are you working on?
Oh gosh, well, I do have 2 picture books coming out next year, but I am working on middle grade novel, actually a middle grade historical fiction novel right now. That's kind of a I have a picture book coming out called The Gift of the Great Buffalo, and so it's a middle grade book that's kind of taking the family from the picture book and expanding them into a middle grade fiction. So
Where
I'm
is it
excited
set?
about that. This will be by the Turtle Mountains near the Medicine Line, or the 49th parallel. Yeah. So how about you? What are you working on? Oh my gosh, you're probably working on a gazillion things.
Well, we're doing. I'm mostly organizing, and it's all volunteer work, but it's work anyway,
Oh,
and we're getting ready to take on as best we can the big banks that are uh, backing the fossil fuel industry, and that's actually work that started after or as part of the Dakota Access stuff. There was a wonderful fellow in Seattle named Matt Remley who started a group called Mazaska Talks, so Lakota for Money Talks, and started doing all these actions at banks and things. And so now we're by the end of the year, hopefully, we'll have hundreds of thousands of older Americans cutting up their credit cards from the big banks if they won't stop their lending to the fossil fuel industry. So, which is kind of it feels like an illustration out of a children's book, that scene, and it's great fun to get all those people engaged. I was last couple of weeks I've done wonderful video with both Carole King and Bette Midler, each cutting up their credit cards. So we're spreading the word as best we can.
I'm so glad. It's so hard to get people to understand that. When I did the same with my bank, I'm like, okay, listen, I need to know where you put your money, my money, where you putting my money. And they were just like, oh, nobody ever asks that. Well, I am asking you that. So that's a good point. I was gonna say, what can you tell people about, like, what can they do? Because I think sometimes I always get asked, like, what can young people do? What can we do to make change? And like what you just said, like changing your banks and like divesting from big banks that are putting your money into fossil fuels. Oh, please, no
Yeah, no,
more
it's
fossil
it's good fun. Along these lines, there's a good question in the question and answer box from Beth. And this is something I'm very curious to hear your take on too. When you're writing, she's talking in particular about this nonfiction book that I'm working on about the climate situation. And do you have to be careful about how dire it seems, and so you're not to provoke angst and depression and things. And it's a very good question. There's been a lot of work in the last few years about the sort of spread of climate anxiety and depression among young people. And um, I I will say, I don't know about you. I find I do a fair amount of talking. I'll end up talking in schools and things, just because I'm out all over the world organizing. And often people say, "Well, will you come to school and talk to the kids?" And I'm sure. Um, I always find that they respond best if you're quite straightforward about what the problem is and do them the service of sort of not sugarcoating it. And if you say, uh, if you give people some plausible things to do. And I'm not talking here about 4-year-olds, but like 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds or 14-year-olds. I find that they're nonsense detector, to use a polite phrase, is better than adults. And adults are quite happy to be told, oh, if only buy a Tesla or something, everything's going to be okay. But kids are like, yeah, I don't think that's going to do it. And that's why they're so good at, and that's why they are becoming such great organizers around climate stuff. I've in the last few years done all these op-ed collaborations with 11-year-olds and 13-year-olds, great writers, ready to go, and terrific organizers. I'm doing on our next national call next week for Third Act. I'm interviewing a wonderful 11-year-old who has a huge petition going all over the country to get electric heat pumps sent off to Europe to help with the Ukraine crisis and the climate thing, which makes me super happy. I found myself last September, I had to take a week off to write college recommendations for people who I just think of as close collaborators in the climate fight. And they just happen to be 17 and it's time for them to go to college, and I forgot. So I find that if you give people real work to do, the anxiety and depression and angst is less, Beth, than otherwise. And I think that's probably true of adults too. That you never want to give people false hope, but you do want to give people jobs.
Yeah.
That's what people want, are eager for, I find.
Yep, I agree 100% with everything you said. But I agree about being straightforward. I don't know, and I mean, maybe I am old school, but that's how I raised my son. It was just like, I not babying them, young people, but telling them the truth, and like you're saying, if you just not scare them, like, oh, but listen, we need to do stuff. We need to do things, and we can't keep talking about doing things, but we actually have to do things.
Yep.
And this is what we can do. Not trying to scare you, but I don't think they get scared if you just tell them like that. I just don't like, honestly, like I say to my son, it's hard. I'm sorry, but it's hard. It's hard. It is hard work. We messed this planet up pretty darn bad, and it's going to be hard work to fix it. And it's gonna, you can think of that way, but we're all going to be in this together, right? It's going to be easier if we do it together, and we have a plan, and we say, I'm going to do this, even whatever your piece is, but together, if we each take a piece, we can change it. And that's why I'm just so frustrated. And even when I talk to kids, they'll say, but one child once said to me, but what do we do without oil? Like, we need oil for everything. And I said, we do? I said, really, we don't. I said, there are a lot of other things we can do. There's sustainable, there's renewables, we have solar, we have wind power. I said, we don't have to rely upon these things. And these are things we don't have to hurt the planet to get. We don't have to extract it. We don't have to take things. And he was like, oh, I never thought of that. Why aren't we doing that? And I said, I don't know. Why aren't we doing that? Talk to your dad and mom.
I now enjoy telling everybody. I just wrote a long piece for the New Yorker about the idea that that humans have been setting things on fire for 200,000 years. That's been sort of one of our distinguishing marks as a species, and it's done us well. But that we now all of a sudden live in a world where we don't have to, where we can take advantage of the fact that the good Lord hung a large ball of burning gas 93 million miles away in the sky, and we know how to make use of it for the things that we need, for sun power and wind power. So if kids of a certain age say, yeah, we've been getting energy from hell, but now we can get it from heaven. So, let's get to it. And everybody laughs but everybody gets it, it's kids are good at understanding that things change too, that because we did something, and one of the things that makes it easier, I think, is that kids are less stuck in their ways. So the idea that we're going to have solar panels and in a, instead of a furnace or whatever, doesn't seem so strange. Why not? If you've lived 60 years using one technology, yeah, then it's a little harder to imagine something else. But if you're, you know, 8, everything changes all the time anyway. People are always telling you you have to do new things and go to new schools and do, new stuff and whatever. Why would it be strange to, and so that's another thing that makes it a little easier sometimes, I think.
I agree. Change is good, especially, yes. And things aren't, you can't have, it's like I said, I always thought about eating new things, new foods. I'm but how do you know it's gonna like the greatest thing ever if you don't try it? Like, you have to try it. And then, but if you don't, you don't know. I know it's hard. We all get into a rut. But
The other thing I'm guessing, and this I may be wrong about this, and it may, since my daughter, it's been many years since she was young, but I think the other thing is, especially with picture books, we're still talking about writing for people who haven't spent their whole life looking at screens, and still probably have a stronger grasp at this point of the actual physical material world around them than those of us who spend most hours of most days staring down the screen of the laptop. And that's really fun. Turtles are not a kind of abstract concept to a 5-year-old who has a pond nearby to go try to catch frogs in the way that they're kind of an abstract concept to people who, I read the other day that the average person sees more pictures of lions a year than there are lions left in the world, but they're not the same thing, and so it's it's good fun to get to imagine an audience that in that way may be more sophisticated than the audience we write for as adults.
oh yeah, I definitely think that. Yes, they always keep you on your toes. That's the thing I find about writing for young people. Oh, you cannot. They keep you on your toes, but it's so fun. I can't imagine, right? I mean, you'll probably feel that way too, right? It's so
Maybe I
fun to
still
write
will,
for
but
young people.
one picture book after another. Look,
Yeah.
Carole, this has been extraordinary fun. I'm just could not be more grateful, and more grateful to your IT consultant there for getting you up on board. It's been good to have a 15-year-old on hand too. But so many thanks for your work, and so many thanks for your generosity in coming by today. And I'll look forward to getting out in the woods or fields someday with you and just walking around and looking at things. That'll be fun.
Awesome.
And to Chantal and to Dafydd, many thanks. This has been a great pleasure to get to do this, and to everybody who joined us today. Many thanks, especially to young Dorsey, for whom this book was dedicated. And it was good to have you in the audience.
Carole, thank you so much for this evening. It has been an absolute delight. You can order both We Are Water Protectors and We Are Better Together from Northshire.com. And we'll see you in another virtual event soon. And maybe if you're in the Vermont area, we'll see you when Bill presents his memoir next month in Vermont. Thank you all so much, everyone, and have a great evening.